That morning, as the gentle sunlight slipped through the narrow gaps in the curtains, the young woman had no intention of getting out of bed. Another day had arrived, just like every other. Work, bills to pay, and dreams still unfulfilled. She reached for her phone, scrolling through familiar notifications. An email from work, promotional messages, a few trivial updates. But then she stopped. A message appeared, one unlike any she had ever received before. It was from the lottery company. She sat up abruptly, her heart pounding as she stared at the massive number displayed on the screen. This couldn't be real. It just couldn't be. She checked and rechecked. The winning numbers matched perfectly. There was no sign of a scam. She had just become a millionaire. Her hands trembled, her breath unsteady. In the whirlwind of emotions, one thought kept racing through her mind. What should I do next? She got up, locked her bedroom door, and pulled the curtains shut, as if someone could somehow see this secret through the walls. She couldn't tell anyone, not her family, not her friends, no one. Why did something that should have been the ultimate joy fill her with such unease? She went online and searched for stories about past lottery winners, and almost instantly, a nightmare unfolded before her eyes. Most of them lost everything within a few years. Some fell into overwhelming debt. Some were exploited by their own families, abandoned by friends when they refused to share their wealth. She read about lawsuits, broken families, even crimes that stem from lottery winnings. She couldn't let that happen to her. But what should she do? She had no knowledge of managing money. She had never studied investing or financial planning. No matter how large the sum, it could disappear if she didn't know how to use it wisely. A decision formed in her mind. She would not touch the money. She would not spend recklessly. No one could know. Winning the lottery did not mean success. Keeping the money, that was the real challenge. A few days after receiving the news, her life continued as usual. She still went to work, still lived modestly as she always had. But something had changed. She now spent all her free time learning about money. Every evening, she sat in front of her computer, reading articles and watching videos about finance. She carefully took notes on the mistakes others had made. Never invest in something she didn't understand. Never spend frivolously. Never let emotions dictate financial decisions. But reading alone wasn't enough. She needed a real plan. She visited financial forums, quietly observing how wealthy individuals manage their assets. She studied stocks, real estate, investment funds. But the deeper she delved, the more she realized a harsh truth. Knowledge couldn't be gained overnight. She needed a mentor, someone who could help her truly understand the world of numbers. And she had no idea that this person was about to enter her life in the most unexpected way. As the year drew to a close, the city glowed with dazzling lights. People rushed about, making last-minute preparations for reunions and celebrations. But the young woman was in no mood to think about the festivities. She wandered the streets, her mind tangled with thoughts of the future. She had money, but she still didn't know exactly what to do with it. As she approached the Grand Cathedral, she suddenly stopped. An old homeless man sat huddled in a dark corner. His tattered clothes were barely enough to shield him from the biting cold of the year's final night. She glanced around. People walked past, caught up in their own worlds, paying him no attention. She stepped closer. Bending down, she placed a small amount of money into his hand. The old man looked up, his clouded eyes reflecting both surprise and gratitude. But there was something else in his gaze, something that unsettled her. It wasn't just poverty. It wasn't just hardship. It was a deeper kind of pain. She couldn't bring herself to leave just yet. She asked him a few questions about his life. His voice was low, broken at times. He had once had a different life. He had once had a home, a family. But then everything vanished. She rose to her feet and walked away. Yet something inside her remained unresolved. A feeling whispered that this encounter wasn't meant to end here, but she didn't yet know where it would lead. A bold decision that changed her fate. Her footsteps slowed, then stopped completely. She turned back, looking at the old man still curled up under the dim streetlights. The wind howled through the alleys, sweeping loose scraps of paper across the pavement. She clenched her hands, a sudden thought flashing through her mind. No one should have to spend New Year's Eve like this. Taking a deep breath, she stepped forward once more. "Would you like to come home with me?" Her voice was soft but firm. The old man lifted his head, his deeply lined face revealing shock. It was as if he couldn't believe what he had just heard. "I have a spare room," she continued. "If you have nowhere to go, you can stay for a while." The old man remained silent. A cold gust of wind swept past, causing him to shiver slightly. She didn't push him. She understood that after years of living on the streets, his trust had likely been worn down by empty promises. But after a long pause, the old man slowly nodded. At that moment, she felt the weight of many eyes turning toward her. A few people stopped, watching her with puzzled expressions. A group of young men whispered something, then let out mocking laughter. "Look at that! Another girl trying to be a hero. For all she knows, he might not even deserve help. Who is he, really?" Bringing someone like that home, one day she'll wake up with nothing left in her house. The murmurs were low, but loud enough for her to hear. She tightened her grip on the strap of her bag, keeping her composure. They might not understand, but she did. She knew exactly what she was doing. No one said another word. She simply bent down and helped the old man to his feet. She could feel the frailness of his body, the heaviness in his steps, as if it had been far too long since someone had supported him. They walked away, leaving behind the whispers, the skeptical glances, and the fading laughter. But she didn't care. She wasn't doing this for approval. She was doing it because she knew it was the right thing to do. And that New Year's Eve, she did not welcome the new year alone. As they entered the house, she led the old man to a small but warm spare room. "You can take a shower and rest here. We'll talk more tomorrow." She didn't ask any more questions. She understood that everyone has a story, and not everyone is ready to share it right away. The next morning, just as the first rays of the new year peeked through the window, an unexpected sound came from the front door. A knock, soft at first, then louder. She frowned, glancing at the clock. 6 a.m. Who would come at this hour? When she opened the door, she was surprised to see 2 local police officers standing on her porch. One of them spoke, his voice firm but not harsh. "Good morning. We received a report from some residents in the neighborhood that you are harboring an unidentified individual. May we come in to check?" She froze. Her neighbors had called the police? She quickly glanced across the street and caught a few hidden gazes, peeking from behind windows. Clearly, people had seen her bring the old man home last night. She let out a quiet sigh and stepped aside, allowing the officers to enter. The old man was already awake, sitting at the kitchen table, holding a cup of tea, his expression as calm as ever. One of the officers approached, his tone measured but investigative. "Sir, can you tell us your name?" The old man looked up. His eyes showed no fear, just a deep exhaustion that had settled over the years. He answered his name slowly, but when asked about his previous residence or any form of identification, he shook his head. "I don't have any." One of the officers turned to the young woman, his expression growing more serious. "Are you sure about this? We just want to ensure your safety. If this man has a criminal record or any issues, we don't want you to get into trouble." She understood their concern, but she didn't need to hesitate. "He's homeless, but that doesn't mean he's dangerous," she said, her voice calm yet resolute. "I invited him in because I couldn't leave him out in the cold on New Year's Eve. This was my decision." The second officer, who had remained silent, now studied her carefully. "Would you be willing to sign a formal sponsorship to take responsibility for him?" Without a second thought, she nodded. After a brief exchange, she signed the document, confirming that she would take responsibility for the old man and guaranteeing that he would not pose a risk to the neighborhood's safety. Just before leaving, one of the officers turned back to look at her, his gaze noticeably softer than before. "Not many people would do this. Are you sure?" She smiled. "Absolutely." When the officers left, she turned back to the old man. He still sat there, his frail hands wrapped around the warm cup of tea. But there was something different in his eyes, a quiet emotion, a deep respect. Perhaps after so many years, this was the first time someone had truly believed in him. And that was how a very special connection began. After that morning's events, life slowly returned to normal. She no longer cared about the wary glances of her neighbors. She knew she had done the right thing, and most importantly, The old man no longer had to wander the streets. In the days that followed, he gradually regained his health. Proper nutrition and restful sleep brought color back to his face. She didn't pressure him about his past, nor did she force him to do anything. But the old man was not the type to only take without giving back. Every day he helped her with house chores, cooked meals, and occasionally accompanied her on shopping trips. They didn't have long conversations, but gradually a quiet understanding formed between them. One evening, as they sat at the tea table, the old man looked at her, his eyes deep with thought. "Do you know, you're the first person to help me in so many years?" She froze. That statement wasn't a complaint, nor was it bitterness. It was simply the truth. After a brief silence, he continued, "I once had everything and then lost it all because of a single mistake." For the first time he opened up. He had been a financial expert, someone who understood money better than most. He had a happy family, a thriving company. But he placed his trust in the wrong person. A close friend, the person he trusted most, took advantage of his kindness and betrayed him, leaving him with nothing. His wealth vanished. His wife and children did not stay. Within a year, he went from a successful businessman to a homeless wanderer. The young woman sat in silence. Before her was no longer just an old beggar. He was a man who once had everything and then lost it all. But instead of drowning in bitterness, he only let out a quiet sigh, as if the weight of those years no longer pained him. She looked at him, overwhelmed with emotion. She didn't know what to say, but she knew one thing. This meeting was not a coincidence. She sat frozen after hearing the old man's story. Outside, the night was deep, but she didn't want to leave the tea table. The dim streetlights flickered through the window, casting shifting shadows across the floor. She had kept her secret for too long. No one knew she was sitting on an enormous sum of money. No one knew how terrified she had been when she thought about the future. But at this moment, she felt she could tell him. "Actually, I won the lottery," she admitted, her voice quiet but slicing through the silence. The old man lifted his gaze slightly, but there was no surprise in his expression. "A very large sum," she continued, "but I'm afraid of losing it like others have. I don't want to end up like the stories I've read." The old man set his teacup down, remaining silent for a long moment. Finally, he slowly nodded. "You've made the right choice," he said, his voice deep and certain. "Keeping money is harder than making it." Then he looked at her more intently, as if reading her thoughts. "Not just keeping it, but growing it. If you don't, that money will disappear sooner or later." His words echoed in her mind. She had thought endlessly about how to manage her money, but this was the first time someone had spoken to her about strategically making it grow. A new door had just opened before her. From that day on, their conversations were no longer just ordinary chats. The old man didn't just talk about his past. He taught her things she had never known about money. "Never put all your money in one place," he said. "Smart people always have multiple sources of income. If one door closes, they have others." She listened intently, carefully noting every word in the small notebook she always carried. Patiently, he guided her through fundamental financial principles. Concepts that seemed simple, yet were the foundation for anyone wanting to preserve and grow wealth. "Never invest in something you don't understand," he said. "The biggest risk doesn't come from the market. It comes from not knowing what you're doing." He taught her how to maintain financial balance, to never keep all assets in one place. Your money should be divided into multiple categories: savings for security, investments for growth, and an emergency fund for the unexpected. He also emphasized the importance of insurance. No one can predict the future, but we can prepare for it. Insurance isn't a wasted expense, it's a shield to protect your assets. And finally, he gave her the most important lesson. Emotions are the enemy of financial decisions. If you let greed or fear guide you, you will make mistakes. These weren't just abstract theories. Each principle was a lesson carved from his own life, a life that had risen to the top and then fallen to the depths. And now he was passing those lessons to her. She applied them little by little, weaving them into her daily life. And then a big idea started forming in her mind. She couldn't just let that money sit in an account forever. She wanted to create something of real value, And now she knew exactly what she wanted to do. Step by step, she turned a dream into a real plan. For a long time, she had been passionate about fashion. Clothing was more than just fabric. It was a way for people to express themselves. She had always dreamed of creating her own brand. But before, that dream had seemed too far away. Now, under the guidance of the old man, it was no longer just a dream. She decided to use a portion of her money to start, but not by recklessly investing everything at once. Think big, but start small, the old man reminded her. There's nothing wrong with beginning with simple steps. A solid foundation will help you avoid the mistakes that many others make. She began researching the market, identifying potential customers, and drafting a detailed plan. In the days that followed, she poured her heart and soul into building her brand. She didn't rent an expensive office. She didn't chase fleeting trends. Every dollar she spent had a purpose. She focused on quality, creating clothing that was not only beautiful, but also sustainable, aligned with the values she wanted to uphold. The old man observed her every step, sometimes just nodding in satisfaction without saying a word. Then one day, he told her something she would never forget. You're no longer just a lottery winner. You're becoming someone who creates real value. Those words made her realize she was on the right path. Her fashion company was not born in luxury. There were no extravagant launch parties, no flashy marketing campaigns. She chose to move slowly but steadily. Under the old man's guidance, she started from the very basics, understanding the market, defining her target customers, and carefully refining each design. Don't get swept up in superficial things, and the old man warned. Truly successful people are the ones who control their spending desires. She took his advice seriously. She didn't waste money on grand offices or unrealistic marketing strategies. She maximized the resources she had step by step, turning her idea into reality. Slowly, her brand began to gain attention, not because of hype or luck, but because of true quality. Customers didn't just buy clothes, they felt the values behind them. She built success on effort and real value, not just luck. Even as her company grew, she held on to one core belief. Success is not built on luck alone, but on dedication and real value. The old man had been her mentor, the person who had illuminated her path, and she would never forget that. To express her gratitude in a way that truly mattered, she offered him a special advisory position in her company, where he could continue sharing his knowledge and guiding both her and the team toward further growth. I want you to be by my side, she told him sincerely, not just out of gratitude, but because I truly believe that your experience and wisdom are invaluable. The old man smiled gently and nodded. Because you understand the value of hard work and fairness, I believe you will go even further, he said. And indeed she did. Her brand didn't just flourish in her country, it expanded to the international market. The young woman who once feared her lottery winnings would ruin her life had now become a true entrepreneur. Looking back, she knew what was truly valuable. But when she reflected on her journey, she knew that the most precious thing she had gained wasn't money. It was the lessons, the experiences, and the person who had guided her in the right direction. Years later, she hadn't just preserved her wealth, she had built an empire of her own. But the thing that made her proudest wasn't the number in her bank account. It was the journey that had brought her here. One day, as she sat with the old man in the small garden behind her house, she looked at him with deep gratitude. If it weren't for you, I probably would have wasted everything I had, she said. The old man simply smiled, his eyes distant, as if looking into the past. Have you ever thought that if I hadn't lost everything in my past, I wouldn't have been able to help you today? He asked. She fell silent. Everyone has their own journey. Some people lose everything, but from the ruins of their past, they can help others avoid the same mistakes. At that moment, she finally understood. Success is not a destination. Success is the way we walk the path. Her story was not just about a girl who won the lottery. It was a story of perseverance, discipline, and kindness. And she knew that no matter what tomorrow held, no matter where life's unexpected turns might lead her, these lessons would stay with her forever. Wealth had never been the true measure of success. It was how people used it that ultimately defined their worth. Finding one's way alone in the dark wasn't always the best approach. Sometimes a single piece of advice from someone experienced could save a person from making mistakes that would cost them a lifetime. Above all, kindness was not just a virtue, it was a door that could open paths previously unseen, connecting people who once seemed to have nothing in common and changing destinies in the most extraordinary ways. She gazed into the distance, feeling the soft breeze pass by. She had not only preserved her luck, she had transformed it into something truly meaningful. Because in the end, what truly matters is not how much money we hold in our hands, but what we choose to do with it.